strategy to release Lebanese prisoners in Israel?
الاستراتيجية الوحيدة الممكنة هي أن تعمل ليصبح لديك أسرى من الجنود الإسرائيليين وتفاوض عليهم لتطلق سراح أسرى. ليس هناك طريق آخر.
جميع خطات الخط الاثنين يا أبا عبد الله، الكون كله لن يستطيع أن يستنقذ هذين
time in 24 hours, Israel pounded Lebanon's only international airport.
We strike the Beirut International Airfield to hint to the Lebanese government that nothing is safe once they are operating against Israel. And nothing is safe. As simple as that.
One of the basic principles of the laws of war is that not only should you not target civilians, but you should avoid attacking civilian infrastructure, and you should focus on military targets. What we have seen in this war are many attacks on purely civilian targets.
Every target is legitimate in Lebanon right now.
أنا فجأة حسيت إنه هوا ما في، يعني إذا بدي أحكي صوتي ما يطلع، يعني نفس بدي أتنفس ما قادر. دغري ضربت براسي إنه في شيء غير طبيعي يعني. لبنتي كانت بالمطبخ، عيطت لها دغري تيجي لهون، وصلت لهون تقريبا، وفات الصاروخ من هون. فات من هون ولجوا أول هيدا.
No one could rationally believe that Israel would commit such an offensive and destroy such massive levels of civilian infrastructure, residential homes, schools, the like in Lebanon over 2 soldiers. This war was not a war in retaliation to the captured soldiers. It wasn't a war in retaliation. It was a war of pure offensive measures.
بعد ساعة واحدة يعني ساعة الضربة ما عرفتش شو صار. أكيد يعني غبت فترة من الوقت. هون كان في جورة منمطار محل هالحديدات. اجت الضربة نحن عندنا بزاوية الغرفة اللي نحن كنا نايمين فيها.
Maybe this is a part of a general program to rearrange the Middle East again, and this is what Rice said. This war is a first step in order to a newborn that is the new Middle East.
It is time for a new Middle East.
There's no doubt that that war last summer was a war between Iran and the United States, fought out between Israel on behalf of America and Hezbollah on behalf of Iran.
كله بوش حرام يقولوا بيبي حرام.
إذا بكون
حمام كله حمام نلطة حمام كله حمام فوق راسنا بو 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 ليل إحنا حمام.
أنا كنت قاعد هون ها مطرح هاي كنت قاعد هون اجى الصاروخ من فوق راسي من هون كت الحجار علي فشخت 4-5 فشوخة الشعب الكبيرة راحت على الحيط لغاد لو يجي حالي قاعد هني كيفين مين.
Israel has a right to defend herself. Every nation must defend herself against terrorist attacks.
I think the first use of the word terrorist was probably from the word terror in the French Revolution. the French terror, the guillotine and the purges that followed. And of course, in subsequent wars, particularly the Second World War, the word terrorist came to be used by everybody. The Germans were terrorists, the Germans would call the Royal Air Force the Terrorflieger. So terror is a long overused word. And even before we started using it in our generation, or the generation before last, about those people who use armed, quote, terror, unquote, against us or them or whatever, governments or whatever. It had become a cliche, it had become applied, it was a pejorative term applied to your enemy. So you get this constant use of the word terror, become a punctuation mark, an orchestra, a symphony. And the worst part of it is that once you use the word terrorist, a word you can't argue with, you can't explain their motives, because to do that you are pro-terrorist. You demean the person and turn them into the beast figure, the animal, who can be crushed, bombed, torn apart with cluster bombs, napalmed, do what you will.
أنا إيه لأنه ولاد صغار بينزلوا هون بفزع تنفجر فيه. هذه مثلا بدنا نقول مثلا هيدي يكونوا بلو، هيدي يكونوا بهي الصفرة هي شفتيها؟
The U.S. legal code of terrorism is any act of coercion or intimidation against a civilian population in order to get a change in governmental policy. So in that frame of mind, we see that actually, according to the definition of the U.S. legal code, it has been Israel that has been committing acts of terrorism against Lebanese, because we see that very clearly. I mean, the vast majority of Israelis killed have been soldiers. The vast majority of Lebanese killed have been civilians. 30 to 45% of whom, depending upon which poll you use, have been children. Okay, so clearly the terrorists here, according to definition, are the Israelis.
Well, there's no question that the United States and many in Europe and elsewhere, especially Saudi Arabia and its camp in the Arab world, were hoping to provide a pretext that would hold under international law for the Israelis to invade Lebanon and try to smash the major military force of Hezbollah. But of course they couldn't do that. But if you look at the pretext carefully, Hezbollah was blamed for instigating the conflict by violating the blue line, the borderline between Lebanon and Israel. But if you look at the actual record of the violation, you find that between the 2000 and the Israeli war in Lebanon, Hezbollah did indeed violate the blue line some 100 times. Israel, in the same period, meaning from 2000, when Israel was forced to humiliatingly withdraw from South Lebanon, it violated the blue line 11,782 times. It shows you the discrepancy.
There's a constant Israeli feeling that they are losing the battle on this, or what they call deterrence. That they have to show that they are very powerful and they have a power of destruction. And the pretext for doing it differs. It can be the abduction of 2 soldiers. It doesn't matter. I don't think the cause is important. Important is the need to show the destructive power of the Israeli army.
There's been a prisoner exchange before between Hezbollah and Israel. It's not as if this was the very first time. I mean, Israel knows that it has 3 Lebanese POWs. Israel knows that Hezbollah has been stating for quite a while that they will work towards their release. Israel previously had actually conducted indirect prisoner exchange with Hezbollah, so they have a history of conducting prisoner exchanges. There would have been no reason for them not to conduct a prisoner exchange this time around. Unless, of course, they had other objectives for the offensive. Unless their offensive had nothing to do with the soldiers and everything to do with the destruction of Lebanon.
When the war began last July, and the Israelis began to destroy Lebanon's infrastructure and economy, the Americans didn't call for a ceasefire. They loved the democracy of Lebanon. The Cedar Revolution, they called it. That was a State Department phrase, not a Lebanese phrase, by the way. They loved Lebanese democracy, but once it was Israel versus Lebanon, they didn't care.
تقعد كثير ما تدعسوا على مطار.
دمر البيت دمر الدنيا هون. بيت خي بيت خي بيت يعني خربين كمان. لا في هون مخرب، لا في هون حزب الله، لا في هون شيء منوب
لأن احنا عرب فيش لنا مخرب.
فيش شيء، احنا كل أهالي، فيش شيء، كل بيوت راحت، كله حرام، كله نزاع، كله خسارة على العالم.
إسرائيل ما بتعرف حرام من نوب.
رحلنا عليه، رحلنا على جبير، رحلنا ما خلانيش
كنا ساكنين في فلوغة احنا.
لا رحلنا عليها. بروح أمريكا، بيبي أنا أمريكا.
I think it was part and parcel not only of Israel's war against any semblance of resistance to Israel, whether it's secular, socialist, communist, or fundamentalist. And the second is to continue to contribute to the Sunni-Shiite conflict. Here is Hezbollah, the most important, influential Shiite political organization in Lebanon.
Hezbollah is a highly disciplined organization. Their security is better than any organization, certainly better than Israeli security, better than any organization's security I've ever seen. They clearly believe that discussion, top security, and forward thinking, which is what we pride ourselves on in the West, is the way to survive and the way to make inroads into their enemies. And it pretty much works.
Well, Hezbollah is without exaggeration the most powerful political party in the entire Arab world. In Lebanon, it's a controversial political party. I think it's very important for listeners to know that Hezbollah did not engineer or pioneer resistance against the Israelis. Resistance against Israel was begun in 1982 by a group of 3 communist organizations. And they started the national resistance movement against Israeli occupation of Lebanon. Hezbollah came later, in the late 80s especially. I mean, they started earlier, but they became a major force in the late 1980s. And the Syrians were the ones who wanted Hezbollah to take the mantle of the resistance, especially when they put a very effective resistance to the Israelis. In Lebanon, I mean, they have, like most powerful and popular fundamentalist organization, whether it's Hamas or Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, a network of social, economic services for people. And I mean, this is what people fail to see. I mean, regardless of what one thinks of the ideology of Hezbollah, there's a whole network of social and economic services that are provided throughout Lebanon. But of course, it's politically motivated and awarded.
The political side of Hezbollah has really no contact with the military side except through Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the chairman of Hezbollah. And it works. In this way, the Hezbollah has totally blinded Israel's intelligence eye into Lebanon. And to blind Israel is quite a feat for a guerrilla army.
Hezbollah, it's fighting for the sake of Lebanon, for the sake of the Lebanese, for the sake of all the poor people that are living in Lebanon, especially in the south and in the Bekaa, where they are every day under the aggressions of the Israelis.
نحن هون قرى مزارعين، تبغ، قمح، عدس، فول، حمص، زيتون، حرقوا لنا اياها كلها، ما عندنا شيء ناكل. هذا شوفت عينكم بتشوفوا كل شيء هون تنظروه، ما خلوا شيء، حرقوا الأخضر باليابس. جوز هون 21 يوم لا أكل لا شرب ولا أعناق ولا صليب أحمر ولا طوارئ ولا الجيش اللبناني. أنظروا القرى مثل ما حكيت إنه اللي بيضل هون أهل القرى الحدودية شريط الحدودي رايحين ندمر البيوت عليكم تتحملوا مسؤولية نفسكم. عندما سمعنا هذا الخبر طبعا حفظنا على أرواحنا أرواح أطفالنا ونزحنا إلى بيروت كذلك الأمر. قعدنا عراة في الأحراش في المباني المدمرة في أي شيء لأنه ما عاد في مساكن أكثر ما نزح الشعب اللبناني. فهمت؟ أي بس أول شاتك شوي لأنه طرشتنا إسرائيل قد ما 21 يوم زربتنا إلا كان هون عنا مقاومة تدافع عن وطنها عن أرضها. نحن جماعة صارت إسرائيل محاربتنا من كذا سنة لأنقاض الروائح تالعة على العالم ما فيها عادي في قراها. خلى المرجع الدول العظمى تيجي تشوف تنظر بعينها.
الله أكبر. اللهم إن هؤلاء القرابين الشهداء بين أيدينا عبيدك وأبناء عبيدك وأبناء إمائك نزلوا بك وأنت خير منزول به. اللهم إننا نعلم منهم إلا خيرا. الله أكبر. الفاتحة. فتح للجميع.
جمال محمد جعفر
جمال
conflict, and the UN couldn't even meet to condemn the killing of their own members in Lebanon, to condemn massacres committed in Lebanon by the Israeli forces, or to call for an immediate ceasefire. I mean, who has ever heard of nations getting together and calling for a ceasefire, and the Israelis saying, you know what, I agree, but give us 2 days? Israeli aggression against Lebanese increased in those 2 final days that the United Nations gave to Israel to commit acts of aggression.
Cluster bombs are not banned under international treaties, but what's prohibited is the use of cluster bombs in areas where there are civilians. The main reason, there are 2 main reasons. The first one is that these are weapons that have a wide span. So if you use them in an area where there are civilians, these weapons will cover civilian and military targets. And again, going back to the basic principle, you always have to distinguish between civilians and military. The use of these cluster bombs in civilian areas would violate that. The second point is that cluster bombs have a very high failure rate, called the dud rate. So a high percentage of these small bomblets is not going to explode. So basically it's going to fall on the land, and it's going to remain there and create effectively minefields. We just spent a week in southern Lebanon driving around. When we were visiting, there were at least 35 villages that are completely contaminated by clusters, and there are thousands upon thousands of these unexploded ordnance, which continue to kill and injure people, and that's a massive concern. And what's even more worrisome is that the deminers are telling us that what they're seeing is that most of the cluster bombs we used in the last 3 days before the ceasefire.
دعسنا عليها مش منتبهين، فجرت فيني.
شو حسيت؟ كنت واعي؟
ظلت واعي، بصرت صوت نصرين طلعوا تقطعوا، نصرين والكبد تقطعوا، صاروا وصلوا لي يوم توصيل ببعض. كنت خطر أول إشي، بس الحمد لله صرت منيح.
صار هون بالبلد مأساة وقهر وعذاب كثير بالبلد، مش أي بلد يعني، بس هون إنه كثير عايته لأنه فيها إنه حزب الله كثير، إنه بيقولوا هن حزب الله إنه هن مؤسسين. نحن مثلا زارعين سحاري، بندوره، مقته، خيار، كل شيء، حمص مثل سحاري، بس انه لما انضربوا القذائف كلها قذائف يورانيوم، انه ما بتسواش مثلا انه تاكليها. التين والعنب مثلا قد ما ضربوا قذائف هون على البلد كلها ما صارت يورانيوم، يعني انه كلها سموم، هذه السموم كلها بتورط للمرض السرطاني.
شيء يعني اجوا هرجوا لك بيتك، اسالي يعني انه اجوا شو قتلوا، اسا حاطينها الالغام، هذه الجمله اللي حكيتها، واسا بعود بحكي حاطينها الالغام لمين؟ الي والك، اسا يدعسوا ما بيطلعش في اللغم، ما يعرفش اني يدعس ما بيطلعش فيي، لمين حاطينها؟ للشعب، للطفل وللعاجز وللكبير وللصغير، واجوا هرجوا لنا بيوتنا مش وزعبونا وشرشحونا وعذبوني ودمنا مقاومه، يعني لا. والحجر اسالي البيت، الشجر، الحجر كله بحب السيد حسن وقديع، وبيكره امريكا واسرائيل. ايه صح، عشان انه يفكروا انه والله هيك انه عم يضربوا على المناطق حتى يضغطوا على العالم، انه والله الشعب حتى تكره حبته بالزيت، يضغطوا على الشعب انه والله هيك الشعب انه عم يتاذى وعم يتبهدل وما بعرف شو، انه عم يضربوا عليه، انه ما بيقعد عنده اعصاب، ويضغط على السيد انه عشان السيد يوقف. هاني مثلا اولادي فخرنا بحزب الله، يعني اولادي مشانتنا هلا عندي ولدان وبيقولوا حزب الله، يمكن نربيهم وعلمهم واسسهم على الشيء، يمكن ما بقول لا، ولسه بقدموا لحزب الله ما بقصرش. إليلو ايه شو ما فيها شيء، مش انت بدكم الصراحه، هي الصراحه هي قلبنا وهي اللي بدنا نحكي هيك ليه. حزب الله حزب الله عوض مصاري، عوض مثلا اكل، عوض مثلا معنويات، كل شيء حزب الله، كل شيء يعني حتى ثياب للاولاد مثلا، احذيه، اكل، كل يعني ما خلاش شيء، يعني العائله يعطيها 10,000 $، 5,000 مثلا، الحاجه $5,000 5,500، انا مثلا $10,000 انا عندي عائله، حسب الاشخاص عوض ايه حزب الله بس كل شيء معوض.
The vast majority of Lebanese, the vast majority of those of us here in Lebanon, and most especially all the Lebanese that have experienced in one way or another Israeli occupation or Israeli aggression, are very much in support of the right to resist this aggression. And since our Lebanese army is very weak, and I mean weak militarily, as well as weak in experience, as well as lacking the political will that is necessary to strengthen the army, then the country is left with no other recourse but a non-governmental agency that can actually strive and work to protect and defend it. And that other recourse is right now Hezbollah. So it's not so much that the supporters of Hezbollah are necessarily Muslim. or necessarily Shia. It is very much that the supporters of Hezbollah are either those who have experienced Israeli aggression or those who view that any act of Israeli aggression committed against anyone, anywhere in the country is an act of Israeli aggression committed against us all. And these individuals see that the Lebanese army is ill-equipped. I mean, it basically cannot defend Lebanon from an act of aggression. And we saw it in this war, how the Lebanese army was not even able in any way, shape or form to defend itself, let alone defend the country from Israeli aggression. And we all see very clearly that our only defense has been the national resistance movement of Hezbollah. They have managed, in this war specifically, to thwart Israeli occupation. I mean, who can say that if we did not have Hezbollah, if we did not have this national resistance movement, that you and I would not be able to have this conversation right now because the Israelis would have been sitting here? This is where they were in 1982. Who's to say they wouldn't have come this far in 2006?
In 1982, I was in Lebanon and I was in Beirut during the Israeli siege of Beirut, and there was savage bombardment. I had to relocate on 2 occasions due to Israeli bombardment of civilian areas where I was. And I can tell you that from then I realized there is an unconditional support by Congress and the media and the government for Israeli violence and aggression on Lebanon. And this was not an exception. It's the same pattern.
I served in the Army, and 3 of my children served in the Army at the same time up north. So it was something of a family experience, which made it all the more interesting and complicated. Interesting in the Chinese sense of may you live in interesting times. We went into houses in South Lebanon and found civilian residences with families in them packed with Katyusha rockets.
To be clear, there is evidence that Hezbollah did fire from civilian areas. And in that case, that would also be a violation of the Geneva Conventions. But our own investigations have showed that in many, many cases, the areas that were hit by Israel, we did not find any evidence that Hezbollah was there or that it was hiding weapons there.
There was at least one case that I know of, and there were more that I'm sure of, where they not only put civilians into military target areas, but they didn't even inform us. In other words, they didn't use them as human shields, they used them as human sacrifices. Their intention was for us to hit the target and for the civilians to be killed. Anything that Israel does is criticized. It was interesting that Hezbollah was firing rockets at our civilian population, aiming at hospitals, for example, and that was considered to be okay. When Israel was going after combatants and civilians were killed in the process, we were condemned for it.
Militarily speaking, there is a contradiction between the actual damage that the primitive Katyusha rocket can do to a house. You can see it in Haifa. Unlike the bombs of the F-16s that just don't leave anything from the house, you can see a house in Haifa where you see 1/4, I'm not saying it's nice, but 1/4 of the house is gone, most of the house is there. There is a contradiction between that physical destruction and, of course, the psychological fear that it can hit you anywhere, although the chances, unlike F-16 bombs, are very slim.
When we talk about destruction of civilian infrastructure, it's not just a matter of a bridge torn, okay? It's not just a matter of a school built, school destroyed. It means our educational system has taken a step backwards. It means our economic health has taken a step backwards, because now I am sure we're going to be more in debt. It also means that our economic future has taken a step backwards, because we are a country that is built on services, banking, financing, tourism, and the like. Therefore, we are a country that needs trust. Nobody is going to come to Lebanon unless they trust that they're not going to be killed by an Israeli bomb. Nobody's going to put their money in a Lebanese bank unless they trust that the bank will function. For these kinds of economies to function, there needs to be trust, there needs to be stability. That much has been destroyed. So in so many ways, we are now just as where the Israelis wanted us 20 years back.
What it says from morning to night, they say that we are only targeting military targets. And this is not an air base, nor a missile factory, no nothing. So why should they, this is a 100% civilian target. Why should they do that? What is the reason, to destroy a dairy? This is a big question. Yeah, because, I am a Maronite Christian, I have no political, let's say, affiliation to to anybody. I am not interested in politics. I am not interested in parties. I never did. The only thing which I was interested in work and business, family. Never politics, never parties, never things like that. I have my personal opinion about things that yes, but not as a politician. I never worked. And we were never associated, neither this company or any other company we work with politicians. None at all. We have a dairy, we have 2,000 cows, we have 285 workers. From the air, we are a very impressive site. We have 32,000 square meters of buildings. And the site, a farm, a dairy. So I don't know if you want to harm, something. What do? You harm something nice, something impressive from the sky. You don't go and hit a small shop. So I think they wanted to harm Lebanon economically. This is the only reason they've done it. The direct cost, the investment, the total investment of the whole project is about $50 million. The direct losses of, if you want to replace whatever was demolished, it will be about $21 million. And the time to rebuild that will be at least a minimum a year. And don't forget now that out of the 285 workers, all of them are at home, no work. So, and us, we didn't even take a decision to rebuild yet, until things, really clarify and things like that. So I don't know. So this is a big hole in our life for, this, unfortunately.
ما حصل طبعا هو كان خارج التوقعات، ليس فقط بالنسبة لنا، بالنسبة لكل مشاهد وكل مراقب وكل من حضر إلى هذه المنطقة وشاهد حجم الدمار الكارثي الموجود هون. طبعا احنا كنا متوقعين انه في مجموعة من مراكز اللي محسوبة على حزب الله او المنتمية الى حزب الله هي مراكز اجتماعية ممكن انه تستهدف، لكن ما حصل انه تم استهداف الضاحية بشكل عشوائي، يعني خارج ما يسمى بالمربع الأمني، وبالتالي في حجم دمار هائل فاق 300 مبنى بالكامل تم تدميرهم وأكثر من 600 مبنى تضررت.
Yes, there are certain what we would consider legitimate military targets within Dahiyeh, namely the command structure of Hezbollah, but that doesn't make all of Dahiyeh a legitimate target. And what's worrisome is that there were statements by Israeli officials during the war saying there's an area in Beirut, and they were actually referring to Dahiyeh, where only terrorists live today. And clearly this goes back to the lack of distinction between military and civilians. And the result of that, the consequence, was that Dahiyeh was attacked ferociously.
What was being hit in Beirut were Hezbollah headquarters, Hezbollah offices, Hezbollah control centers. As a matter of fact, one building that was brought down on top of a Hezbollah command bunker that Nasrallah was in at the time. And he was trapped in there for a few days. So, once again, when we're talking about a military organization, and that's what Hezbollah is, it's not an army because it doesn't represent a state, but it's a military organization for all intents and purposes. Its headquarters are legitimate targets. Its communication centers are legitimate targets. The fact that they build them into civilian areas doesn't make them protected, it simply endangers civilian areas.
So yes, there are war crimes committed. The next step is to create an international commission of investigation to shed light on all the facts that are relevant. And we hope and we are pushing for accountability for people responsible for these war crimes on both sides.
ب 12 الشهر بلش، كنا هون نحن عنا دوام. اي نعم، كنا موجودين حوالي الساعة 3 بالليل، كان عنا 5 مجموعات حرارية تعمل يعني. وفجأة الساعة 3 بالليل اجى قصف على الخزان الأولاني هداك التحتاني. بالليلة الثانية ليلة رجعوا كمان طرقوا خزان الثاني وضلت ولع شهر. شهر بكامله، يعني الخزانات واحد يولع الثاني، شهر بكامله ما قدرنا نطفيها ابدا، وتسرب الفيول باتجاه البحر، والدخان عبى هون المنطقه كلها، وصل على بيروت حتى الدخان.
We could see the plume of smoke all the way from here, and G is about 30 kilometers down. We could see the plume of smoke. Then the wind blew the smoke over, the smoke covered all of Beirut. And just to think that we've been inhaling this, we're still inhaling it, it's in the air. And some of the oil in the water gets evaporated, so we inhale those toxins as well. So the air right now is very polluted.
The impact on the civilians is so much higher than any sort of military gain that power plants should never be attacked. And the attacks on the power plant, the fuel storage in GEA, but also the electricity infrastructure in Lebanon is a violation of the Geneva Conventions.
تطوعت مع مؤسسة جهاد بناء التابعة لحزب الله لحتى نساعد العالم بمسح الأضرار وعملية دفع التعويضات. يعني في مصادر الحكومة عم بتقول إنه بكلف أمر البلد حوالي 10 مليار دولار.
من هون اياه طايري من هون لهون السطح وهيدا من هون.
وصرنا عاملين لحديت هلا يعني تقريبا حوالي 30 أو 20% من الجنود، وبعد مكفين لقدام ان شاء الله. كل العالم اللي مهدم بيوتها كله رجع على بيته. وبالنسبه للمتضررين في العمليه بدها تاخذ شويه وقت لحتى يندفع التعويضات، انما كله عم يصلح حق.
بقي سهران هو واختي تركته الساعة 12 ونامت. بالليل ما فقنا إلا على صوت الحجارة عم بتهر، ما سمعناش صوت الضربة ولا صوت طيارة ولا شيء، بس من قبل ما يطلع الضربة كان كتير يطلع ضرب مدفعي، كانت المروحية توطي، الحرب طيران الحرب يوطي يقصف بالوديان، ضرب المدفعي كان كتير على الوديان، والمروحية كتير وطت النهار، ونحن خفنا من صوت المروحية، خفنا يعملوا شيء انزل، إنه كانت ليلتها كتير كان في قصف قوي. كنت نايمة هون، يمكن 11 تراويح وغير حصيري بعد تنحصروا تراويح ونايمين. جيت بدي هون حسيت حالي إني مدمولة. جيت بدي هون وحسيت حالي مدمولة، خلص حالي أرفع راسي ما أتحركش بالمرة، مدمولة كنت نايمة كلني هيك وراسي كله تحت التراب وجسمي كله تحت التراب. وبنت بالآخر صرخت صوت قوي أو قلت إذا سمعوني ما سمعونيش راح استشهد. إنه بنتي أول شيء كانت عم بتصرخ، بعدين صارت تعان ما عادش سمعت صوتها. أنا قلت إنه خلاص راح موت وما حداش راح يسمعني. صرخت صوت قوي بس مع إنه كان تمي عم يتعبى تراب، كل ما أصرخ تمي يتعبى تراب وعم بختنق. صرخت هالصوت قلت إذا سمعوني إذا ما سمعوني إنه خلص راح استشهد. بعدني بالأرض بس خلصت إيدي نتفي، سحبت الرقاية دوري من وراي ونولت إياها، أعطيتها لابن عمي هون أخذوها راحوا فيها تحت، قالوا لي كانت بعدها عايشة وقالت بابا واستشهدت.
Even though we lost all these establishments and buildings and roads, etc., and infrastructure, but the Israelis could not achieve their goals, and this is a victory for Lebanon.
Well, in Lebanon, there are public opinion surveys. Overwhelmingly, they believe Hezbollah won the war. And in Israel, they certainly don't believe they won the war. I mean, if Israel won the war, they would not have committee of investigation. There was no committee in Israel in 1967 that investigated the reason for winning the war in 1967. So it seems to me there is at least a tacit acknowledgement in Israel that they lost the war and were humiliated, and the Israeli press is full of articles talking about the tremendous blow to Israel's image and the image of the Israeli army in Arab eyes.
President Bush took a sharp exception the other day when the Hezbollah terrorist group claimed victory in the recent fighting in Lebanon.
Hezbollah, of course, has got a fantastic propaganda machine, and they're claiming victories. But how can you claim victory when at one time you were a state within a state, safe within southern Lebanon, and now you're going to be replaced by a Lebanese army and an international force?
Of course, when it comes to George W. Bush, I mean, to rationalize or explain the kind of statement that he comes out with, and of course, I mean, one doesn't take seriously statements he makes about any matter dealing with the Middle East or foreign policy. But I think this was, a small attempt on his part
which of course didn't work, to try to convince Arab and Israeli public that Israel won the war when everybody else knew otherwise.
شو عملتنا هلا امريكا واسرائيل شو استفادت؟ بالنهايه اسرائيل كانت هي الخسرانه وبالنهايه الشعب اللبناني خسر كثير كمان واسرائيل خسرت. ما بقول لك حدا ارتاح يعني بهذه الحرب، لا اسرائيل ولا نحن، ما معناتها ان امريكا يعني تدمر لبنان. عيد شو؟ عيد نتفه حزب؟ شو عملنا الحزب وشو عملت لنا اسرائيل؟ وصلونا لتحت التحت. نحن من الجهتين ما إلنا خصة. كنا هون بالبلد وبلشت إسرائيل قصف أول شيء عن الحدود، بلشت تحرق الأرض كلها، بلشت قصف تضرب. قاموا هدموا الإذاعة هون بالضايعة، لما انهدمت الإذاعة بالضايعة قالوا لنا اطلعوا، رمت مناشير خلال ساعة لازم أهل البلد يخلوا الضايعة. طلعنا من الضايعة ونزلنا لتحت على المهنية اللي عند الجيش اللبناني. هلا بقينا تحت حماية الدولة، بقينا شي 8 أيام. أكيد جينا على بلدنا تأثرنا فيها، كل شيء خربان، ما فيها شيء عادي، بيوتنا يعني لو شوي مدمرة كليتها، ونحن كمان عشنا في فترة عذاب وتشردنا وقعدنا بالملاجئ ودقنا القمرين كمان. هلا شو الشعب الجنوبي على شو عيشته يعني؟ نتفة دخان، نتفة حقلي، شو عيشتنا نحن؟ أبسط عالم هون بجنوب نحن عايشين. كان المفروض ما يعملوا هيك، ما المفروض هالظروف توصل لعن هالشكل، كانوا بالسلام فين يعملوا كل شيء. هلا مش معناتها اختطفنا 2، نقوم ندمر الجنوب كله عيد 2، عيد الحزب غلط، كانوا يحلوها بالسلام. هلا اطفال راحت تحت الدمل، عالم انهارت، خربت مصالحها الناس كلها. يعني هذا ما كان لازم يصير. دوله مثل امريكا دوله ديمقراطيه هلا ما المفروض تعمل بجنوب لبنان عن هالشكل.
أنا هنيك وحرك يضربه بهالرشيش، لك يا عمي بليز، الشرب سكت. بيقولوا في حزب الله، عرفتي؟ طيب شو خاصنا احنا بحزب الله؟ احنا بدنا نعيش، احنا عندنا اولاد وعندنا إلي، ما احنا هيك. لك والله معاملة زفت، ما في واحد قال لي خذ لك رغيف، شايفه؟ رغيف او شربة مي.
بلا حكينا عنه كثير وقالوا لنا انه ميت وصرنا نبكي كمانات وما عرفنا عنه اي شيء بنوب، يعني على اساس انه بي خالص مش طيب. قالوا لنا ناس هون لما بلش القصف بالمدرسه قالوا لنا انه بيكم ميت، خلص ما عدتوش تاملوا انه تلاقوه طيب بالضايع.
بطلع من هون هو.
ما يطلع قدام يعني؟
اطلع بس ربش لقدام يا كيم. ها
لا بعيد.
ايه مع انه ما بديش
إذا صاروخ يقذفوه. ضربوه فيها ونيك إجا عند بين الشباك والباب. كنا 4 عيال بالبيت.
كلكم جيتوا أسرى كلكم؟
ظهر الصبح بدي اتوضا وصلي، طلعت على البير عم عبي مي، سمعت طحش بالكرم، فكرت ان عن زيت جارنا، نزلت لردهم زعبن من هونيك، الا شفت ان الاسرائيليه هونيك تحت الحيط شي 50 واحد. حملت حالي ورجعت، وصلت على البيت عم قلن كان في 3 عيال بالبيت، ولادي ولاد خيي ولاد اختي ونسوان تنتين. نطلعوا لنوقف قبالنا أحسن ما يهجمونا على البيت يقوسونا. بعدنا بالحقي إلا بلش لقويص على البيت، كيف بدنا نطلع كيف بدنا نروح ما قدرناش. عودت تهربت من تاني باب على الشارع طلعنا نحن والأولاد كنا 20 ولد لفوق. أنا تخبيت هون بالشوك هون. خفت أحسن ما يقوسوني لأني زلمي وطلعنا لفوق. ظليتني هون شي ساعتين لخلصوا تمشيط البيت بيتنا وبيت جارنا وهونيك. أولنا طلعنا لفوق إجا وجهي بوجهه. ساعتها إجا واحد من برا قال لي قعد هون. قعدت طلعوني لفوق مع الزلم. قعدنا فوق ضلينا يومين 3. صاروا يسألونا وين حزب الله. قال لنا واحد مننا قال لنا هيا بجيبتي تعايموا حزب الله من هون لبيروت كله حزب الله روح دور عليه. بهدلوه ضربوه. عودوا بعد شي ساعتين 3 جابونا لهون على هذا البيت. قالوا لنا روحوا على هذا البيت وخلونا بهذا البيت كذا يوم. كنا شي 30 شخص 20 مدري 30 شخص هون بقلب هذا البيت. عودوا جابوا لنا فاج تاني من عنا من البلد من هذا البناء اللي حدنا حطوهن معنا. صرت أنا روح على هذا البيت جيب لن أكل وعلى هذا البيت جيب لن أكل. أنا تحت الخطر والكل ساعة بيقوسوني وربك ستر. آخر إشي طلعوا دورية هني همنا نحن هربنا.
يعني مش قذائف فيني وقذائف صغيرة اللي انضربنا فيها، لا ضربنا بقذائف بتقيلي. بعد ما اجت الضربة وبعد ما وعيت أنا كنت بفتكر حالي أول شيء ظاهر من نفس الغرفة اللي كنت فيها، بس تبين إن الغرفة اللي كنت فيها ما كانش فيها شيء، كان في محلة بس 8 أمتار. نحن كل اللي كنا بالغرفة نحن كنا هي غرفتين مفتوحين على بعض، كلياتنا طايرين على الغرفة اللي فيها النسوين. بس بقي الصبيين 13 صبي كانوا صف واحد بمسافة 4 أمتار من اليمين. 13 صبي أعمارهم من السنتين ل 12 سنة، ل 13 سنة، 12 سنة ونص يعني عمره. أكبر واحد فيهم اسمه جعفر هيك. هؤلاء الواحدين اللي بقيوا بنفس الغرفة لأنه ضربوا بحيط بلمعة صغيرة، ضربوا فيها ونزلوا تسطفوا على بعض والدمل دمل. ونحن الباقيين طرنا كلياتنا على الغرفة هديك. البيت أنا بعد ما وقعت يعني لقيت حالي مش مدمول. صرخت الله أكبر، ما حداش يفزع يعني، مش شايف شيء، مش أجا شيء، بس عرفت إنه انضربنا يعني. بشوف هذا في حدا طيب، في حدا بيحكي. رد علي نسوان 2 وأحمد ابن خالي. قال لي أحمد خلصت جرية بدي أقوم. قلت يعني معناته جري مدمولين يعني بيقوم معي، يعني بيقوم بحبش معي بشوف شو بدي أعمل أنا وياه. أنا مش حاسس إنه أنا مصاب براسي ومش حاسس إنه أنا مصاب بدي وبجري. قربت صوبه على أساس إنه أنا كنت بفتكر إنه أنا بعدي بنفس الغرفة وهو معي بهي الغرفة. قربت شوي صوبه عم حاول إني أعزل، لقيت حالي إني أنا عن واحد عم بدمن واحد. اكتشفت إنه في حد مني جت إيدي على رقبتها للجت اللي حد مني يعني. هوني بهاللحظة هيدي ما عادش عرفت حالي شو بدي أعمل. بلشت صرخ الله أكبر وأبعد بالرب. ظهرت لبرا بدي اتجه بهالاتجاه، في عالم قاعدين فوق بالبيت الثاني. أنا صرت عائلتي كلها، أنا كانت عائلتي تتألف، أنا ومرتي و5 أولاد. أنا فقدت مرتي و5 أولاد، وفقدت والدتي وابن خي. هؤلاء نحتسب عند الله شهداء هن اللي حققوا لنا النصر. نحن بدماء الشهداء انتصرنا، وهؤلاء نعتز فيهم نفتخر فيهم. صرت قايلة على كذا يعني نحن مش من نوع انه اذا فقدنا واحد نقعد بنولول وبنبكي، لا نحن بنفتخر فيهم.
حالك جراح يعني؟
جراحي ما تسكرتش لتفتح ولا تتسكر. اهلا وسهلا.
عم
اوقف يلا اوقف. خليك وياك.
يلا طلع عم هناك. سوي جواد بقى.
يلا اعمل له هيك.
قول له لبيك يا نصر.
والله يلا يلا.
حسن يلا. دي سلم عليا.
So in one way we have been destroyed materially, and it is quite an important destruction, and I'm not going to dismiss that lightly. In another way, what has happened in these past few weeks in Lebanon has impacted not only the Lebanese and not only the Arab world, but I would argue every resistance movement and every liberation movement around the world has felt a sense of hope that actually the minority can win, actually the weak can win. It can, if you believe and if you're organized and if you've got resilience, there is a possibility.
بيحكي حكاية إسرائيل يلي هو أوهم من بيت العنكبوت. معرضنا بيحكي حكاية هزيمة حرب تموز، هزيمة الإسرائيلية اللي تكبدها بحرب تموز، مع صور تعرض الغنائم الإسرائيلية، تعرض واقع الإسرائيلي بعد الحرب، سقوط هيبة الجيش الإسرائيلي، هيبة الجيش الذي كان لا يقهر، الجيش اللي خوف كل الشعوب العربية، الجيش اللي زرعوا بعقولنا أنه هو جيش لا يمكن هزيمته. إضاءة على الجريمة اللي مستمرة، جريمة القنابل العنقودية الكلاستر بومبس يلي إسرائيل رمت أكثر من 200 حوالي 2,000,000 قنبلة عنقودية قبل انتهاء الحرب بيومين. من بعدها بنبلش بحكاية الحرب. حكاية الحرب يلي هي نحن برأينا كان بلشنا فيها مع الإدارة الأمريكية يلي كانت هي أساس تخطيط الحرب تخطيطاً.
summer war, something happened to Hezbollah. Whether it was the increased control of Iran, who after all supplied them millions of dollars for rebuilding the villages, the Shiite villages that were destroyed in the war, or whether it was because Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah began to feel he had a personality complex. There was a giant 30-foot high picture of Nasrallah would greet you as you drove in from the airport. It's been taken down in the last 2 weeks, but it did for many months. Used to have Hezbollah, Nasrallah keychains, Nasrallah ties, I mean, extraordinary amounts of things. And I think that there was a certain amount of hubris. They had overreached themselves. Immediately after the war, their courage, and it undoubtedly was courage, in opposing the ferocity of the Israeli bombardment, even though they had provoked it by capturing 2 Israeli soldiers and crossing the border, was admired by Christians, Sunni Muslims, as well as Shiites. As the bills began to come in, and as the cost to Lebanon's future economy, with a national debt of $41 billion, how you spend that much is a mystery to me, there was a turn against Hezbollah. Hold on, who are these? Nasrallah is not the president of Lebanon. He was making presidential television statements. And then came the moment when Hezbollah turned and said, we want the downfall of this government. We want bigger say in the government.
Politically speaking, we're at a very difficult situation because the divisions in the country have been magnified. There are still external factors that want to divide this country even more, and this is problematic. So politically speaking, I would say we're at a very harsh crossroads. I do not believe we're actually going to have a civil war in this country like we had in '75, but I do believe that we're at a very difficult political crossroads, and it all depends what's going to happen in the next few months as to the future of this country politically.
And I think it is indubitable that wherever the Bush doctrine has appeared in a country, it has pushed it to the brink of civil war. If you look at Palestine, Iraq, Lebanon, Somalia, all these places are cornerstone of the Bush doctrine, and in all these cases, the American government has succeeded in instigating and intensifying civil unrest in the country and pushing it to the brink of civil war, if not outright clashes between the various parties.